Welcome, everyone. This is Paula Bartholomew, School Director here at Hawthorn University, and I'm very excited to have you with us tonight. This does commence our fall webinar series, and we have a very important topic tonight to start off our series. I think it's very relevant. In this presentation, Dr. Liz Lipski will share her expertise on the topic of digestive wellness, and we'll be talking about the brain-gut connection. We strongly believe and understand in our work that digestive imbalances and mental health go hand in hand, and so this presentation will focus on the brain-gut connection. If we balance digestive function, often mental issues like depression or fatigue, other issues like arthritis, eczema, migraines, ADD, and many autoimmune illnesses also come into balance. So in this presentation, there'll be a focus on celiac and gluten intolerance, as well as irritable bowel syndrome, some information on probiotics, and certainly information on healing foods. If you have not had the pleasure of joining a presentation with Dr. Lipski, well, this is a good one to join. Dr. Lipski is Director of Doctoral Studies and is Education Director here at Hawthorn University. She holds a doctorate in clinical nutrition and is board certified in both clinical nutrition and holistic nutrition. Liz has been in clinical practice for over 25 years and is the author of Digestive Wellness and Digestive Wellness for Children, as well as Leaky Gut Syndrome. So welcome, Liz. We're excited to have you with us.
Thanks, Paula. It's fun to be here and to be starting off the year. And I'm going to pick up somewhat where Marcelle Pick ended last week, because she was talking about infertility and all the different connections there. And she did a really great program on how everything's interconnected. And I think this is a good follow-up to that, don't you?
Yes, absolutely.
Be kind of fun. So the topic today, as Paula was saying, is we're going to talk about how our brain and our gut are connected. And what some of you may or may not realize is that as nutrition counselors and people working in the field of nutrition, we can have a big impact on people who are depressed, anxious, and have a lot of other health conditions just by working with food and a few supplements, but even just with food. So I'm going to hopefully show you how important you all are so that you can figure it all out. Now, as nutrition counselors, one of the things that we pay a lot of attention to is what people eat. And that's the most important place to begin, because food is our most intimate contact with our external environment and our external world. And every day we take in food and we say, I want to be just like you. And depending on what that food is, that's either a great idea or not such a good idea. So as nutrition professionals, we work a lot with what people can eat. And we're working on whole foods and organics and locally grown and fresh as much as possible. But people, a lot of my clients, they eat all the right foods, but they can't digest them. And then when they get them into their bloodstream, they can't absorb them right. And then they can't get them to their cells. And then they're having a problem with either diarrhea or constipation or irritable bowel syndrome. So they're having problems excreting the waste. So tonight we're going to talk about some of the ways that we can help people to function better. And what's exciting to me is that the digestive system, we don't really think about it that much as long as it's working. But as soon as it's not working, all kinds of things get disrupted, because the digestive system is more complex than just putting food in and waste out. It's muscular in that our mouth is a round muscle, and there's muscles all the way down that push the food through and also open and close so that things don't go where they don't belong. For example, our ileocecal valve that's on the right side of our body in between our small intestine and our colon, it needs to close, otherwise garbage from the colon backs up into the small intestine, and that's not a good idea. It's also, the digestive system is the heart of our immune system, and a lot of that is the small interface that's the one cell thick lining that lines the digestive system and has contact with our food. And also our probiotic bacteria that we're going to talk about. It's neurological. We make more neurotransmitters in our gut than we do in our brain. And we have more nerve endings in our digestive system than we do in our spine. So it's complex that way as well. And also it's hormonal because we have over 32 known hormones that are just inside of our digestive system. And then it's cardiovascular. For example, I just read a new study that came out that showed that if we just brush our teeth twice a day, we have a 70% reduced risk of having cardiovascular disease. And if we floss, it would be even more. And we know that the bacteria that are in our mouths, which is part of our digestive system, is also, really implicated with cardiovascular disease. And also the probiotics that are deeper down are also, they help regulate cholesterol levels and triglyceride levels and also help benefit us. And then also all of our microbiome, which we're going to talk about shortly, is known to run our metabolism. So whether we burn hot or we burn cold or whether we gain weight or we don't gain weight has a lot to do with the probiotic bacteria and the balance of all the gut flora that are in our body. So this picture is what the inside of a healthy digestive system looks like. This is the small intestine, and you can see there are little finger-like projections. I've got my little pointer at one. And these little finger-like projections, what we can't see is that coming out of them are little tiny, smaller projections called the microvilli. These are the villi. And if we laid this all out flat, it would cover a surface about the size of a double tennis court or about 200 times the surface area of our skin. It's big. And what happens in a lot of people is that this gets flattened out. It almost gets to look like a ball tire, especially in people with celiac disease. And this is where the immune system lies. And these villi are single cells. It's only one level deep. And then these cells bring through the microvilli the nutrients that we need all the way into our bloodstream. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that might get compromised and how it might not work that well. We're going to focus on, I've been working, in addition to teaching with Hawthorn, I've been blessed to be also working on a team at the Institute for Functional Medicine. And we've been looking at these different areas of digestion, and we call it the dig-in model. And we start with, can somebody digest and absorb their food? If not, maybe they need hydrochloric acid or digestive enzymes, or maybe they need some bile salts. Do they have intestinal permeability, which we're going to talk about in a little bit? We also call that leaky gut. And this gut microbiota, which we're going to talk about, and dysbiosis, which is balances, and then inflammation and immune, which we're not going to spend a lot of time on, because I really want to spend time on the nervous system, because the enteric nervous system is so important. Now, I already told you this, that we have more nerve endings in our gut than our spine, and that 95% of our serotonin is made in our gut. So when you start thinking about people who are depressed, they're often put on what we call SSRIs, and what those are is they're serotonin uptake inhibitors. What they do is they keep the serotonin inside of that gut, neural synapse. The nerve cells don't actually touch each other, and what they do is that we stimulate them, and then they transmit these little drops of neurotransmitters, which in this case is serotonin, and then when it hits the next cell, it starts that one transmitting. And so drugs like Prozac and Paxil and so many others, what they do is they keep that serotonin in the cell longer. but you have to remember 95% of the serotonin is made in our digestion, and what it's there for is to keep us having regular bowel movements and not having too much or too little, otherwise we end up with diarrhea or constipation. And not only serotonin's made there, but acetylcholine's made there, and dopamine, and virtually every single neurotransmitter is made in our digestive system. And what they're made out of is amino acids. So if we can't digest the food proteins properly, then what happens is that we can't make neurotransmitters properly. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it, but if the pancreas isn't making enough digestive enzymes, or if that digestive inner lining of the gut is, if those little microvilli are frayed in any way, then the chymotrypsin that's made there doesn't send information to the pancreas telling it to make more enzymes and release them. Also, if we don't have enough hydrochloric acid in our stomach, we're not going to break down protein as well either. And all of these things can result in people who are depressed and anxious and don't feel good. We also can have neurotoxins that are made in the gut, and they create faulty signaling and cell signaling so that the gut thinks that it's inflamed, and it gives the wrong messages. And we know also that doing stress management techniques like biofeedback or acupuncture, or doing hypnosis or any kind of stress release or tension release, even yoga or pranayama, can help reduce symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome. So we know that there's this connection back and forth between the brain and the gut. Now, I don't mean for you to read this actually, but these are different neurotransmitters that you find in the digestive system. And we've got GABA, which it's released in the central nervous system, but it relaxes the lower esophageal sphincter. So if people have too much GABA or they don't have enough, they're going to have GERD. Norepinephrine, it decreases the motility or contraction of the sphincters, and so if you don't have enough, if you have too much norepinephrine, you'll have diarrhea. But if you have just the right amount, then it slows things down. And then acetylcholine is just the opposite. It increases relaxation of the sphincters. So, and you don't want to have too much of that because you'll have diarrhea. So it's all about this balance. Serotonin we talked about. Neurotensin, it's what allows the food to move from the stomach into the duodenum, which is the beginning of the small intestine. Nitric oxide regulates our blood flow and maintains our muscle tone, and also allows the stomach to actually do its churning motion that it does to go so that it can mix all the food we eat. And then substance P really stands for pain, and it gives us more awareness, pain. So when that's really ramping up, we feel stomach cramps and we feel gas pains, and these are some of the neurotransmitters that are there. Now, the gut and the brain is a two-way access, and what I want to spend the next bunch of slides showing you is that this is a two-way process, and that there are a lot of mental health disorders that go hand in hand with the digestive disorders. In my own practice, mainly I see people who come to me because they have some kind of digestive issue, either ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease or irritable bowel, or they've had parasites or whatever it is. And the amount of people who I see who are also on anti-anxiety drugs and antidepressants is really alarming to me. And so I see this two-way street all the time. Now, this diagram published in Gastroenterology Insights in 2009, I really like. It comes from a research group in Switzerland. And at the top, what you can see is that, that you start off right here, kind of in the center top, with behavioral changes. And the behavioral changes, like let's say I'm not sleeping at night. I've got insomnia and I'm not sleeping. Or I'm really nervous about getting my coursework done for Hawthorn. And so the behavioral changes, they send messages and information to my brain. And that brain says, ugh, I'm stressed in my gut. So how many times have you felt butterflies in your gut because you were nervous? Or how many times have you had the runs because you had to speak in front of a group or something like that? It's because our mind affects the way the gut is. And the reason is that when we're stressed, the digestive system mainly, not 100%, but mainly runs on what we call the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relax, stop, rest, which is why in many cultures people take siestas after they eat, and why when I was a kid they said we couldn't swim after we ate lunch, and it's because, you know, you have to have this relaxation thing. So if we're stressed, we don't have a relaxed tummy, it changes the gut bacteria, and we get a low-grade inflammation in our gut that can cause symptoms. On the other hand, we can start from a different place. We can start here with a bacterial infection in our gut, like candidiasis or a parasite or a bacterial infection. We could start with that, and it'll affect our brain, and it'll affect our behavior. And I have some slides on studies that are going to show you how that works. But also the infection causes a low-grade inflammation to those villi and those microvilli, and then we get dysfunction in our gut and we get symptoms. So I wanted to show you some studies which I think are pretty interesting. The first one is was done in a clinic. They took 1,641 patients who had GI disorders, mostly small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is SIBO, H. pylori, which is an infection that mostly causes ulcers, but also stomach cancer and gastric reflux disease, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, and depression, and anxiety. And they took consecutive patients for these 8 years, and what they found was that 84.1% who had like chronic anxiety, 84.1% had chronic anxiety. And that was related to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, H. pylori, and ulcerative colitis mostly. 67% had periodic anxiety, which is called trait anxiety, that they anticipate that something's going to happen in their life and they get really anxious about it. And they found that that was mostly related to irritable bowel, which is mostly either constipation, diarrhea, abdominal pain, or alternating diarrhea and constipation. And 27% of people were actually depressed, and that was mostly related to celiac and irritable bowel syndrome. So they didn't kind of just pick, you know, say, oh, well, we'll only look at the anxious people who have GI disorders. They had a huge amount of people who were anxious and depressed. Then when you look, irritable bowel syndrome, depending on what studies you look at, affects between 10 and 20% of the adults in the U.S. and about somewhere around 14 to 17% of our children and teens. And in children and teens, we call it recurring abdominal pain because they don't always have it exactly like adults do. And 70 to 90% of people with irritable bowel have some kind of psychiatric issue, either a mood disorder or anxiety, as we saw in the earlier. 19% of people with IBS are schizophrenic. Of people with schizophrenia, 19% of them have irritable bowel. In people with major depression, 29% of them have irritable bowel, and in people with panic disorder, 46% have irritable bowel syndrome. Also, you see the same kind of patterns in people who have migraine headaches, fibromyalgia, depression. as well. And so you see the people who have fibromyalgia or depression or migraines have a 40 to 80% greater risk of having irritable bowel than other people. So you see that there's huge overlaps here. And the person who put together this diagram is Natasha Campbell-McBride, who is a MD who works out of London, England, Great Britain somewhere. And she put this together. She's the one who put together what we call the GAPS diet, which is the Gut and Psychology Syndrome diet. And what she's showing here is that whether you have eczema or asthma or attention deficit with hyperactivity, or you have food allergies or autism or dyslexia or dyspraxia, which is that you can't speak, that there's a huge overlap, which is what the studies that I've been showing you indicate, that there's this kind of gut-brain connection here. This is a slide that I put together from a bunch of different studies on the incidence of digestive issues in children and adults with autism. And Helena showed that 91% of kids with autism had GI issues. They took their siblings who didn't have autism, and only 25% of them had GI issues, and in their controls, none. Ashwood and Andrew Wakefield did studies on enterocolitis, which is actually where those villi and the microvilli have big bald spots and inflammation, and 88% of children had that. And you can see incidence of esophagitis, which is an inflammation in the esophagus, abdominal pain, inflammation in the duodenum, chronic diarrhea, stomach inflammation, constipation, gas, abnormal bowel movements, all very high in autistic kids. And often when you correct the digestive issues, you end up correcting a lot of the other mental and emotional issues. Then this slide is from the National Institutes of Health in 2008. 2004. Sorry about that slide title. And what they said in their consensus statement on celiac is that celiac may be associated with an autoimmune and endocrinologic disorder such as thyroiditis, and we see that with Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, and Graves' disease sometimes too. In addition, a variety of neuropsychiatric conditions such as depression, anxiety, peripheral neuropathy, ataxia, which is you can't walk right and you're dizzy, epilepsy, and migraines have all been reported. So again, this is the government saying this, the National Institutes of Health. It's not just me. And here's something about how you would diagnose celiac or gluten intolerance. And the main thing that we have that we can use is an elimination diet. And I think in some ways it's the most accurate indicator of a gluten intolerance or celiac disease. Celiac is really a full-blown disease, but a lot of people have gluten intolerance and they have completely normal testing. There is a company called Intero Labs, and they do a test that looks for genetic testing to see if you have the right genes, but 40% of us have the right genes to have celiac. And we don't all get celiac because it's not as simple as that. There's also antibody testing. You can do IgA and IgG anti-gliadin, which would be indicative of a gluten intolerance, not necessarily celiac. IgA and IgA transglutaminase enzymes are really a great indicator for celiac, and it's really kind of displacing the IgA endomysial antibodies because it's much more specific. The gold standard is considered to be do a biopsy in the small intestine, but only probably 1 out of 10 to 15 people with celiac actually show it as digestive. The other big groups show it as autoimmune diseases and neurological symptoms like we were discussing, or even osteoporosis. So the main tool we have as nutrition counselors is to send people back to their doctors for testing and to use an elimination diet with people, which we'll go over shortly. So one of the things that I've learned recently that I just love is that is that we have genes that we're born with, and then we have our environment, and the overlapping place is really in the middle, which is what's called our phenotype. And according to Eli Fasano, who's one of the main celiac researchers in the world, he says that without something in our environment that causes us to have a leaky gut, we don't develop celiac disease. And from the research that I've read, I also don't believe we develop other autoimmune diseases. So let's talk a little bit about leaky gut. So leaky gut is a euphemism for when people don't have, they have molecules that are leaking through their gut. And you can see in this little movie, which I hope you can see, I think you can, that not the big molecules aren't getting through. Did you see that? I think you did.
Those, yes.
Okay. So so in the next slide, what I'm going to show you is a leaky gut, and you can see that the big molecules are sliding right through those gaps between the cells, and some of the small molecules are still getting through, and where they're all going is into our bloodstream. So if we get these large molecules that go into our bloodstream, our blood can't digest them, and there's nothing that the blood can actually do to break those down except have an immune reaction to them. Now, I want to just kind of show you that again, if I can, because I want to show you what happens at the end. What you also start seeing is not only that the large molecules go through, but can you see how the little molecules, a lot of them don't get through? And this is where we start to have malabsorption. Even the molecules that should come through don't come through. So for example, I have a client right now who's a woman who came to see me, and she was only using a medical food called Peptamen 6 to 8 times a day with some frozen vegetables as the only foods that she could eat. And she was completely malnourished. But she had to do that to kind of break down the inflammation. And now what we've been doing is we've been adding bone broths, and we've been adding well-cooked food, and she's been adding sea vegetables and also cultured vegetables to start building up that lining so that it's not so inflamed. Now here's another. This is a Candida molecule, and you're going to see in just a second that it's going to slip right through. Did you see how that slipped through? And you can see those microvilli at the top of the screen. And those microvilli are, again, they're what are supposed to protect us from this candidiasis molecule slipping right through. And this is what we call leaky gut. When we have a leaky gut, we also have leaky brain and leaky skin. And so we might have depression or anxiety or ADD or schizophrenia. We might have eczema. We might have also asthma, because we also end up with leaky lungs. And some of the symptoms that are really common, these are selected ones, but people get confused and memory issues, and people tell me their thinking is fuzzy, and they have mood swings, and they can get aggressive or nervous or anxious, or just feel like they can't do anything. And then they also get all these food issues like gas and bloating and eczema and psoriasis and food sensitivities and irritable bowel and indigestion and the other things that we've been talking about, like fibromyalgia and migraine. And so it's like if you see somebody and they come in to see you as a client, or you're teaching a class, and someone has irritable bowel syndrome, and they also have asthma, and they're also have mental health issues, you know, rather than saying, wow, you should really go see a therapist and work on your health issues, maybe you want to start dealing with their GI before you do that. It's always good to send somebody to a therapist, though, and to a doctor if you're not sure what's going on. So some of the supplements that I use the most is I love glutamine to heal up a leaky gut. And I have a question mark there because in children who have autism, sometimes you may not get the results that you're looking for. But for most people, for everybody, glutamine is what the small intestine uses for energy, maintenance, and repair. Just like our brain runs on glucose, our small intestine runs on glutamine. And so I like to use glutamine in kind of large amounts, somewhere between 1 and 3 teaspoons daily mixed with a cool beverage. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to have somebody just mix it in with their water bottle, and then they can use that. I also sometimes will use quercetin dihydrate. I like using the Perk Pain Guard or Repair Guard for that because I think for me it seems to work better than other quercetin products. Gamma-oryzanol is something that you find in rice bran oil, so it's concentrated. You could also have somebody use some rice bran oil, which would also do the trick. Zinc is also, zinc is also very important for the health of the gut, and any zinc will work really well. I think about oysters as having more zinc than any food. There's about 150 milligrams of zinc in about 3 ounces of oysters. So it's got more zinc than any other kind of supplement, and also has a lot of other gut healing nutrients and peptides in it. Then there are fish peptides. They're called C-Cure, and they're also really gut healing. Vitamin A, I wouldn't give indiscriminately, but I might have somebody eat liver or calf liver or use cod liver oil, or chicken liver, eat chicken livers for vitamin A, or eggs. Marshmallow root is very soothing to the GI. Antioxidants like vitamin E and C and selenium, also very soothing. DGL is a deglycerized licorice that's also very soothing to the gut. Slippery elm also. And sometimes I'll use digestive enzymes or aloe. And very often I'll use fish oils to help repair the gut. Levels of, anywhere from 1 to 3 grams daily. We think about food, it's information, and we know that most people are not eating as well as they could. Although when we ask people, how do you eat? They go, I eat pretty well. And then you look at their food diary and you see some of them do, but most of them don't. So you've got, pomegranates and tangelos and tangerines and coconuts and melons and blueberries or grapes, and you could either have that or you could have the Jell-O mold that's also really colorful. Polyphenols are the colors in foods, and those foods are anti-inflammatory. So cherries and pomegranate and acai berries and blueberries and blackberries and raspberries and green peppers and all have really good polyphenols that reduce inflammation, and legumes also. So this.
So Liz, before you go back on that picture, you're saying you could also have the Jell-O mold. You're not suggesting that the same nutrients could be garnered from the Jell-O mold as the whole food varieties on the left, are you?
Well, it's got the same colors, Paula, I think. So I think it probably has the same polyphenols. No, actually, those are made from coal tar dyes, from coal. And no, they don't have polyphenols. They just have petroleum derivatives that make them so pretty like that. So we can have information on the left, or we could have the information on the right, and we really don't want the information on the right.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thanks. Sorry, I was kind of going fast there. So this study is an interesting one because it's from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. And what they say is that people who eat basically the standard American diet and the diet that's poor in natural antioxidants, so think, and fiber from fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, and poor in omega-3 fatty acids may cause activation of the immune system, most likely by producing excessive production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So these cytokines are things like NF-kappa B and TNF-alpha and all kinds of things that our immune system goes in and says, wow, this shouldn't be here, and it starts causing inflammation so that our white blood cells can come in and deal with the problem. But if we're always eating a standard American diet, we're always going to have this kind of inflammation. And in fact, I didn't put it in here, but I once had a 12-year-old girl who came to see me, and she said, I go into anaphylactic shock if I have even one yellow M&M. One. And she said, I would be laying here on the floor gasping for breath if you gave me even one. And there was just a study done a couple of years ago that indicated that yellow dye increases inflammation by increasing these same inflammatory cytokines that the earlier study was talking about. Now, in some people, about 4% of people with schizophrenia and in many children who have ADD and autism, people who are depressed, you get some foods, especially dairy products and gluten-containing grains like wheat, spelt, kamut, rye, and barley. In some people, not everyone, turn into something that looks like an opiate in the brain. And when it does that, people start acting weird. They start acting like they're on drugs. And when you take them off of these, they don't like it because they're addicted to the drugs, because they actually feel pretty good because they've got morphine-like substances in their brain. It's like they were just smoking coca leaves, you know. But when you take it away for a while, their brain clears. There's a man that I met named Daniel Hawthorn, and he's an adult. He's in his 40s, and he had autism all of his life. And as an adult, he read something online that said, you know, maybe if you don't eat gluten, maybe you'll feel better. And he remembered that when he was a child, his mom stopped giving him biscuits and started giving him potatoes. And within 4 days, he started talking. So he stopped eating all gluten-containing grains, and by the end of the first day, his brain was starting to clear. And by the end of 3 days, he was like a completely different person. And I've worked with some people with schizophrenia or bipolar or kids with ADD, and it's not always a huge answer, but it often plays a role. So it's something to look for because food can be really inflammatory. And sometimes soy can do this, but mostly it's dairy products and gluten-containing grains. So we're going to talk about elimination diets in just a few minutes, but I want to talk about the gut microbiome. And what I want to talk about is when it's out of balance and when it's in balance. The gut microbiome, there's 10 times more cells in our gut that are bacterial and fungal and parasitic than there are cells in our body. And they comprise 99% of the DNA in our body. So we are either 10% human or we're 1% human, because the rest is really comprised by these bugs that cohabitate with us. And this human microbiome is in our nose, it's in our mouth, it's on our skin, it's in our GI, and it's in our vaginal system and in our bladder, and which is why these are places that we commonly get infections pretty easily. And what's not on here is the lungs, which should be. I don't know why it's not there, but it should be, because we also have probiotic bacteria lining our lungs. By far, the hugest number of them are in our tummies. We have between 3.5 and 4.5 pounds. They're the size of our liver, and they're really like the rainforest. You know, if we go into the rainforest and we clear cut and plant genetically engineered soy, then it doesn't run as well. And what happens with us is when we're under stress, when we eat a standard American diet, when we take birth control pills or other hormones or steroids, when we take a lot of pain medications like aspirin or Tylenol or Motrin or other pain relievers, we block the normal functioning of this human microbiome. And when we do that, then people have changes in their pain receptors. People have faster and slower bowel movements, and there's all kinds of havoc that gets created. So in the early part of the 20th century, Elie Metchnikoff was an MD who won a Nobel Prize in 1906 for his work on probiotics, and he was working with a probiotic called Bulgaricus. It's I'm just trying to think of what the species of it is. Anyways, in Bulgaricus, which is one of the two main probiotics that we find in yogurt. There's Bulgaricus and Strep thermophilus. And he won a Nobel Prize for his work. And what he said over 100 years ago, and what's holding up to be absolutely true today, is that probiotics, which is the bulk of this microbiome, they're critical for us all through our life, but they're most critical when we're elderly and when we're babies. And when we're babies, what happens is the first 3 or 4 years of our life, we create this microbiome, and it's pretty much stays stable our whole life. But if we go on even 1 week of antibiotics during the first 3 or 4 years of our life, we never fully recover from that. And I'm sure you can all think of some time when a small child might go on antibiotics for an ear infection, for strep, and some children are put on them over and over and over. And this sets us up for not having good immune function later in life, because the main thing that the probiotics do for us is they make vitamins and nutrients, but mostly they modulate our immune system. Probiotics are strain-specific. They're kind of like dogs. You know, you wouldn't send a Chihuahua to chase a lion. You would send an Afghan to chase a lion. You wouldn't send a pointer to go fishing for you, because a pointer is good for duck hunting. And probiotics are the same way. We're starting to know more and more about them, although we're still really in our infancy in terms of what we know about which strain you should use for what. Like, for example, we know with irritable bowel syndrome that Bifidobacteria infantum works pretty well, and B. brev also works really well. But there's a lot that we don't really know, and so mostly we're using kind of a shotgun approach. And what's interesting about these nutrients and these foods is that people culturally always used to make homemade pickles and kimchi in Korea, and sauerkraut in Europe, and sourdough breads in Europe, and people would naturally culture and ferment foods. For a while I did some consulting work with Dannon, and Dannon has over 3,000 different species of probiotic bacteria that they collected from kitchens all over Europe. And they're one at a time trying to figure out what they're best at. And so we're going to see a lot more of targeted probiotic supplementation. But I think that the most important thing is probably to get good probiotics from food, and also to get, if you're using supplements, use them that are mixed. One thing that I didn't say yet is that when babies are born by C-section, they miss the opportunity of setting up their probiotic bacteria and their microbiome by not going through the vaginal birth canal. That birth canal does a great amount of trying to set up that immune system from the very moment the child's born. And also when we breastfeed, babies are, their immune system starts to mature more quickly, although bottle-fed babies catch up at about 6 months to a year. So it's not, you know, irreparable if a baby was just bottle-fed. As I said before, probiotics are nutritional. They increase our absorption of minerals like calcium and iron and magnesium, and they can help to minimize lactose intolerance because they break down lactose. They're almost like a lactase enzyme if you've ever used lactate. Well, probiotics can help do that. So, for example, in cheeses or in yogurts or kefir, there isn't the amount of lactose that there is in milk. if I drink milk, you don't want to be around me. I don't want to be around me, but I can tolerate cheese or kefir or yogurt with no problem. They help us digest proteins. They manufacture short-chain fatty acids, which keep our colon healthy, and they make vitamins, virtually all of the B vitamins and biotin, and also vitamin K. So then I started looking today to see if there was any research yet on probiotics for people who have depression or anxiety. And this is one study, Medical Hypothesis 2005, and what they hypothesize is that people who have major depressive disorders also have increased inflammation, they have increased oxidative stress, they have altered gastrointestinal function, and lower amounts of nutrients and omega-3 fatty acids. And they speculate that a lot of these people probably have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which I'm going to cover in just a second. And what they found, they said, probiotics modulate all those same things that people with major depressive disorder have. So maybe if we give people probiotics, their depression will improve, and if we treat their small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And in fact, I have seen a lot of depression clear up. So this is another researcher named Desbonnet, and what she says is that the absence of probiotic bacteria in the gut can have adverse effects not only locally in the gut, but also can affect the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, and also monoaminergic activity, which is neurotransmitters, and features that have been implicated in the etiology of depression. So more recently, just in August of this year, she did a study. She's done about 3 of these, giving different types of probiotics. And what she does is these baby rats, she wants them to swim over water to their mother. And of course, these rats, they don't want to swim across the water. It makes them really anxious, and they don't want to do it. And when they give bifidobacteria, which is a probiotic, for 14 days, it normalizes their stress response, and they just go swim over to their moms. Their tryptophan levels normalize, their adrenaline levels normalize, all the stress normalizes. And so this is preliminary, obviously, but it's really interesting because the research is beginning. Now, in this gut microbiome, we can have bacterial infections, and we can use different herbs and things to help combat those. And one of those infections is called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And this was a study done by Jeannie Driscoll and Betty Bischoff at the University of Kansas that was published. And what they found was that when they checked people with irritable bowel syndrome, they found dysbiosis in 100% of these people. And when they gave them probiotics, they improved. And remember, about 60 to 80% of people with irritable bowel syndrome also have depression or anxiety. So they also found, by Pimentel and his group, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth was found in 78% of people with irritable bowel, and the same group also found the same 78% in people with fibromyalgia as well, and a smaller percentage with people with restless leg syndrome. So if you actually would treat small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, then you can make a lot of that distress go away. And just recently, I did an organic acid test on one of my clients who we first took off of gluten, and she started improving, but she was still having a lot of irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. And her organic acid testing indicated that she might have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So I asked her to go to her doctor and see if her doctor would treat her for that with an antibiotic called rifaximin. And within 3 days on the rifaximin, her gas, bloating, and discomfort were starting to go away. But also what was going away was all of her anxiety about food and anxiety about her life as well. And so the typical test that's used for this is actually a breath test, where you drink some lactulose or mannitol, and then they measure the amount of hydrogen that you produce over a period of between 1 and 2 hours. And it's not us that produce the hydrogen, it's the bacteria. And then doctors like Mark Hyman, he just says if you have gas, bloating, fibromyalgia, discomfort, irritable bowel syndrome, restless leg syndrome, he would just go ahead and treat you. So we don't really have good ways of treating people other than giving them probiotics. And also there is one good study on the use of peppermint oil that will that has a good effect on small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And right this moment I don't remember, but generally I send people to their doctors and ask them to be treated, because this is one place where this isn't nutrition. We're dealing with an infection, and this is not really in our domain. And I try to be, I cross some lines, but I try to be really careful not to practice medicine. It's very important that if you think somebody has a medical problem, that you send them to a medical doctor. We are not doctors, and it's very important that we always remember that. So I do a lot of referring to people back to their doctors for treatment. And I think I talked about most of these before, but these are gut healing substances, and at the bottom you'll see foods. So okra, slippery elm, cabbage, rice protein powder, our fish oils, or algal oils, or modified fats, or elimination diets are all tools that we can use every day with people that will give us a really big bang for our buck. And so you also want to always give people with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, you want to give them good probiotics. If they're on an antibiotic, you can use Saccharomyces boulardii, because it's not a bacteria probiotic. It's actually a yeast. It's a cousin to bread yeast, and so it doesn't get killed when someone's on antibiotics, and it feeds lactobacilli and bifidobacteria. And also cultured dairy products, fermented and cultured foods, really good. So, you know, most yogurts have anywhere from 1 to 3 billion microorganisms. It's not a huge amount, but if people make homemade yogurt, it might have up to 100 billion organisms for, you know, 6 ounces. So having people make yogurt, it's so simple to make. You just take a tablespoon, you heat milk up to about 180 degrees, you let it cool down till it's lukewarm, about 120 degrees, a little warmer than luke. You put in a tablespoon of yogurt, you mix it in, and you let it sit for 24 hours in a warm place. So if you have a pilot light on your oven, you can use that, or I put it in a small cooler that I fill with warm water. I know somebody who just sticks it in their jacuzzi on their way to work, and on their way home they pull it out of the hot tub. You can also use a yogurt maker. I know that's what Paula does, and so it's really easy to make. Other probiotic-rich foods, and here's where, again, we come in: raw vinegars, homemade sausages, sourdoughs, root and ginger beers, fermented anything, really. And then kefir, you can make coconut kefir, but here's 2 different commercial kefirs, and you can see that they have a lot of different types of probiotic bacteria in them. And I personally find that a lot of my clients can tolerate kefir better than yogurt, and I don't know why that is. I just know that it is. In terms of supplements, you want to make the amount of probiotic you use appropriate for who you're seeing. So if I'm working with somebody who's got diarrhea 10 times a day, I'm probably going to use Saccharomyces boulardii because there's great research on it, and I'll probably use 250 milligrams 3 or 4 times a day. If I'm just somebody who wants to maintain health, he might take between 3 and 20 billion organisms a day. And if somebody's got ulcerative colitis, there are studies using 3.6 trillion organisms a day. So you want to kind of vary it. You might I don't think it matters whether you take it once a day or more than once a day. I do like the refrigerated probiotics best. I do tend to like mixtures unless I'm using a specific probiotic for a specific reason. And the most interesting thing about them is that there's new research showing that you can modulate the immune system by using dead probiotics. So it doesn't have the GI benefits, but you can change immune because the genes in those dead probiotic bacteria are still talking to your own genes. And if you're not going to get your probiotics from food and you're going to get supplements, I would highly recommend that you use ones that are really good. Consumer Labs did a study recently of 19 products, and 5 out of them failed, that they didn't even have at least 1 billion colony-forming units of bacteria in them. All of them were free from contamination, but they just didn't have much in them. So always look for a reputable company. Prebiotics are in foods, and they're fibers, and what they do is we take them in and we use them, the probiotic bacteria in our colon, ferment them, and they turn into food like butyric acid that helps heal, maintain, and give energy to the colon. And there are lots of foods that have these, including honey and green tea and maple syrup and peas and all the onion family foods, bananas, especially less ripe bananas, and all fruits and beans and burdock root, which is also called gobo root. So, and Jerusalem artichokes. So again, getting people to eat a variety of natural whole foods. You're going to give them prebiotics that feed the probiotics that balance the gut microbiome. And in supplements, we mostly see inulin from Jerusalem artichoke or from chicory, and we see something called fructooligosaccharides. It's also called FOS. And larch, arabinogalactin, is a great supplement that boosts the immune system and also is a prebiotic. There's all kinds of ways to do testing for food sensitivities, and I did a whole class on that, so you might want to look that up in the archives. But this is where we shine, is doing an elimination diet, and we might do a complete comprehensive elimination diet, or we might just eliminate gluten or eggs or dairy products because we think those are the problems. Or we might put somebody on a Candida diet, which is basically a low carbohydrate diet, or specific carbohydrate or GAPS diet, or in children a low salicylate and low phenol diet. And like that woman I was telling you about before, an elemental diet, which is really where all you're doing is eating medical food. And then fasting also changes symptoms. What I find is that most people, about 80%, respond to the least invasive type of diet. So it's one of the most effective medical tools we have, and this is in our domain. So we have not as many studies as I would like, but we see that elimination diets affect rheumatoid arthritis, irritable bowel, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's also, migraines, depression, MS, and especially type 1 diabetes. And what I do is I let people have non-gluten containing grains and fruits and all vegetables except for nightshades, although I'll let people have nightshades if they're not having joint problems. They can have fish and poultry and lamb if they'd like, or even beef if they'd like, herbs, spices, salt, pepper, honey, olive oil, ghee, coconut oil, they could even have too. And then if they're vegetarian, I let them have rice protein and legumes if they want to do that. So also you could just remove the top 12, which is pretty much what I've done in the elimination diet. And then, or here's just removing the top 2 problem foods, the gluten and the dairy. So here's a case study for you. This is a woman, really wonderful woman that I was working with, who came in and she said, I'm tired, I can't sleep, I've got acid reflux, I have gas, I have arthritis, I have hot flashes, and I don't feel well. You know, I've got fuzzy thinking, and I just don't really feel like myself. And so what we did was we did an elimination diet, and we also, this is an IgE and IgG food test for food sensitivities. And you can see up here, this is dairy. Can you see that all of the dairies in the significant range? Egg white and egg yolk, they're both way up there. The gluten and gliadin, the malt, the wheat, the rye, they're medium, but I said, you know, we better not do those. So let's, right now we got rid of dairy, we got rid of eggs, we got rid of gluten-containing grains. Pineapple was medium, kidney beans were medium, and then there were more dairy products, again, all really up there. Navy beans were also up there, and pinto beans. So I said, you know what, I don't want you having beans or eggs or dairy or gluten. And so we did this, and in 2 weeks, this is what she had to say. I've been wanting to update you on my progress. I got through the 2-week elimination diet, and to be honest with you, I'm continuing pretty much on with this way of eating. I've totally gotten rid of my heartburn and acid reflux. My energy's back. I've stopped my hormones, no hot flashes. My joints are so much better. The best part, I also lost a little weight too. This is how much we can do by just changing somebody's diet. And I have seen depression go away over and over and over by using an elimination diet. I had a woman, and for me, I have to say that depression seems most related to dairy in my experience. I mean, to gluten-containing grains in my experience. It just seems like there may be other food sensitivities as well, but the biggies are usually gluten followed by dairy and eggs. So we want to restore people with food. So we want to keep them on an elimination diet. We may put them on a different special diet, either a yeast diet or GAPS diet or the body ecology diet for Candida or Billy Crook's yeast connection diet. Or the specific carbohydrate diet from Elaine Gottschall, and we have, I think pretty much we have classes on all of these. So you want to put somebody on a diet. It is the most restorative thing, and if you feel confident, you can use some of the supplements that we've also talked about tonight. And then finally, you want to restore somebody. So after the healing, it's time to restore. We stop focusing on what's out of balance, and we begin nurturing. You know, so often what I'm doing with my clients these days is having them rest 2 hours a day during daylight hours and doing something, either sleeping or listening to music or doing some kind of a hobby that gives them joy or listening to birds or gardening, but just really doing something that feeds them and makes them feel like all is right with the world. Because if we don't take time to do that, the gut never heals. And then our mind also doesn't feel good. And so that's pretty much what I wanted to tell you tonight. So Paula, I went really fast, so I'm sure that there's probably a few questions here.
Thank you, Liz. A great presentation. And yeah, there's a few questions. And so I think I'll start backwards and move up because to get to what you were speaking to most recently. And that was the lab company that you just showed for the case study. There's a question, what lab company and panel did you use for the food intolerance panel?
Okay, well, I used different ones. This particular one happened to be Meridian Valley Labs, and I like them because they do both IgG and IgE, and they do 190 foods for $247. So I like it because it's really economical and I get good clinical results with it. The problem with doing it is that it requires a blood draw. So it means that you need to send somebody back to their doctor and ask their doctor if they will allow them to, if they'll draw the blood. There are also Metametrics, U.S. Biotech, now Meridian Valley Lab, and Metametrics, U.S. Biotech, Meridian. I think those are all of them that I know of. They all do
Diagnostics does as well.
Do a finger poke?
Not a finger poke, no.
Yeah, all of these companies do a finger poke it's IgG only, which are delayed food sensitivities, and then sometimes if I'm working with somebody with autoimmune disease, I might ask their doctor to order an ELISA ACT test, which not only does food but does environmental contaminants too. And I think US Biotech also has one that works with foods. You know who else also has another really good one is Great Plains Labs.
Great Plains or Genova?
Great Plains. Genova has one too. Theirs is a blood draw.
Yeah.
It's also a good test, but you know, for the price, I like Meridian Valley Labs better because you get more food for less money.
There's a request that you talk a little bit more about the modified fasting as well as the food combination to deal with the variety of conditions that you've been discussing.
Okay. There's a huge amount of research on modified fasting or total fasting with water in rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and other autoimmune diseases because, as I said before, food is the most inflammatory substance that we come in contact with every single day. And so there are many people, when if they could just stop eating, they feel better because they're not fueling the inflammation. Typically, I don't like to take people back that far. I just like to take them off of the most inflammatory foods, and those are usually soy and wheat and dairy and eggs and sugar and alcohol and artificial, you know, substances, colorings and flavorings and preservatives and things. And so that's pretty much where I start. You know, every once in a while, and I hope that you're not all going to get as first clients the people that I get, because I get people often they're very debilitated, and we start with a medical food like ultra clear sustain and applesauce and broths, and there are people that I have to start with, you know, they come to me and they're not eating anything really. And so we start with really easy to digest foods, broths that have chicken or fish in them that's been really well cooked, or brisket that's been really well cooked, or vegetables that are really well cooked, or vegetable juices that have been freshly made, or vegetable soups that are made in broth that's been pureed. So, I mean, hopefully you're not going to get people that are that sick, but every once in a while you get people who are only on about 3 foods. It happens to me quite often, which I still like working with people who are pretty well, but it's really gratifying when you work with somebody who's really unwell and you start seeing them get well. Today I just got pictures of the woman who was on the Peptamen, which is a prescription medical food, which is, the medical foods are free amino acids, free fatty acids, broken down sugars and carbohydrates, and vitamins and minerals, so that your body doesn't have to do anything to digest it at all. And sometimes you just got to go back there, but hopefully not too often.
Liz, can you talk a little bit about when you take away the fermented dairy yogurt in an elimination, particularly with kind of clients that you've been talking about, do you take it away and reintroduce it as a challenge?
I do. I usually try to keep dairy out for at least 3 or 4 weeks. It takes about 10 days to get it out of your body, and often people will feel queasy, or they'll immediately get diarrhea, or they won't feel good when they reintroduce it. And you have to realize that dairy, that lactase enzymes, are secreted on the very tippy tops of the microvilli. And so if there's inflammation there, or if there's any kind of a blunting of those microvilli, then you're not going to be able to you're not going to get those lactase enzymes, and you're also not going to produce chymotrypsin, which signals the pancreas to start releasing enzymes. So, you know, pretty much if I was taking that away, I would have somebody making coconut kefir, or buying coconut kefir, or using a non-dairy types of probiotics like cultured vegetables or coconut kefir or ghee or something like that.
So in this situation, yogurt as well, because of
Yogurt
it being a dairy product, even though it's cultured. Okay.
Even though it's cultured, it still has some lactose, and some people are reacting to the lactose, some people are reacting to the casein.
Yes.
So I always take it away just to be sure.
Okay, just a couple more questions. You said that glutamine isn't always indicated and doesn't always yield the best results for autism spectrum kids.
Yeah.
Is it actually counterindicated, or does it just not always work every time?
Okay, so here's the controversy about it. The controversy is that glutamine can potentially be made into glutamate, which is a neurotoxin. It excites the MDMA receptor sites, and so it can be a brain toxin. And that's possible because there's work that's shown that the blood-brain barrier is not as impervious to penetration as we previously thought, and so it's possible that that could happen. So in the autism community, glutamine is kind of on the no list. I happen to have a friend named Doug Wilmore who is the preeminent glutamine researcher in the world, and believe me, I don't know that many important people, but he's one of them that I do know. And I asked him about this, and he said, you know, there's no mechanism for converting glutamine into glutamate in the brain. The brain doesn't have the enzymes to do it, and we give really high-dose glutamine to people in emergency rooms after brain trauma, after accidents, and when they've got acute brain inflammation. We give them 30 or 40 grams of glutamine a day, and it helps bring down the inflammation. He said, and we've never had any problems with increased glutamate levels. He said, I suppose it's possible, we've just never seen it. So in the autism community, in the DAN community, it's kind of a no-no to use glutamine. But my perspective when I'm working with a child who's on the spectrum or an adult is let's try it and see what kind of result we get. And if the child's worse, then we won't keep using it.
Yeah, I agree. It's certainly what I've experienced too. And I think you've really addressed this, but part two of the student's question is about the potential effect of yogurt having opiate-shaped molecules, both slowing the colon and also making their way into the bloodstream and potentially crossing the blood-brain barrier.
Yes, absolutely, they can, because what we're reacting to there is the casein.
Right. Yes.
The casein in some children gets changed into a casomorphine, and it's not. It's so striking when you see it, isn't it, Paula? You take somebody off dairy or gluten, or it's so striking because sometimes depression lifts. I had this one woman that I was working with, and she was so depressed, and we did an elimination diet, and really the things that were her big bugaboos were sugar and gluten-containing grains. And she rewarded herself one day with a piece of chocolate cake, and she was so depressed she couldn't get out of bed for 3 days.
Yeah, hard reward, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
to me, it's like you said, it can be extremely dramatic. When you find the food that's provoking the problem, it'll show up fairly quickly, and oftentimes be very dramatic in its scope of the way it's influencing the person's health. So it might have been depression, but other things start feeling better too that they may not have identified or correlated with a problematic food.
Yeah.
So last couple. Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. I forgot.
There was a question if you'd recommend a probiotic, if you had a specific probiotic that you recommend for children that have autism?
Okay, so let me just kind of talk about probiotics that I like for everybody. So in the autism community, some of the products that are used that I also agree I think are wonderful products are Kirkman makes products specifically for the autism community, but they also make wonderful probiotics. I also love Claire's probiotics, and I'll often use their Biotic Complete from Claire or one of their other probiotic strains for children and adults. I also really like Metagenics makes some great products. Pharmax makes great products. VSL3 is a really high-dose probiotic that's been used for people with ulcerative colitis and pretty severe GI distress, but you can use smaller doses and get a good result. Let's see. I use transformation enzymes. I use their Plantidophilus, which is a very low-dose probiotic for people who are intolerant to probiotics because they seem to tolerate it really well. Sometimes, personally, I like to rotate my probiotics because I'm not taking them for any specific reason. So I'll use a couple bottles of one brand and then a couple bottles of another. So another kind of preventive probiotic that I might use would be the Perk Digestiguard Forte. I know that there's Udo's Choice makes some good probiotics. Enzymatic Therapy makes a probiotic pearl that's pretty good. Natron makes excellent probiotics.
Yeah, I think you went in a really good order and ended it with a really good one also, Natron. So starting with the top of the line. And was there anything that you recommend specifically for women that just had C-sections?
Yes, for women who've just had C-sections, I would start taking, hopefully you're able to nurse, and so for those women, if they can nurse, I would recommend both you and the baby taking some Bifidus infantis, and there are several companies, Douglas Labs and also Natron and I think Pharmax. They all make infant formulas that are mostly Bifidobacteria infantum, which is what the babies have as their main probiotic bacteria for the first 2 to 4 months, and then they start developing more lactobacilli. So for both of you to be taking that, and how you do it for a baby is either just take a pinch and put it on their tongue, or just dip your finger in the bottle and just whatever's on your finger, let your baby suck your finger. You can also put it on your nipples. And for you to take like, I don't know, a quarter teaspoon once a day. And also for women who've just had C-sections, you could also take, other probiotics that are more specific to you as well. It doesn't hurt babies to have any of the other ones we talked about, too. Studies are pretty interesting, showing that babies who get probiotics from birth at the age of 2 and 5 have less eczema, less asthma, and less allergy all the way around. And, those kids are being followed, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens when those kids are 18 or 45 as well.
It will. I want to thank you so much, Liz. It's been a very informative presentation. Thanks for hanging through the questions and answers. I want to let everybody know that we have altered the webinar schedule slightly. You'll see it in the webinar announcements that come out. We are doing webinars on the first and third Tuesday of the month, and we are starting them at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And the presentation will be approximately an hour, and then we will have post-presentation open discussion period for about 15 minutes or so. So if anybody that's on the line today would like to stay with me and have open discussion about this topic, you're welcome. Please join me. And in 2 weeks, that puts us at September 21st. Our next presenter is Patty Lerner. She'll have a fantastic presentation. The topic will be total load. we'll be talking about what the body burden is, what we're all carrying in us based on what we're eating and our environmental influences are and the consequences of that. So we hope you can join us again for that presentation. And thank you again, Liz. I really appreciate the time that you spent with us and your expertise. And I want to thank you all for joining and wish you all the best of health.
Thanks, Paula. It was a pleasure.